Hello again, this is Mike back for our second video on backpackingearth.com. And in the first video we looked at the Sony Smart Remote Control app and how it works with the new A7, which is my camera of choice right now. In this video we're going to look at how the A7 works, or in a couple of cases doesn't work, with some of the previous Sony NEX lenses. I'm actually recording this video on my NEX7, which was my primary camera prior to buying the A7, and so I've got a handful of lenses that I'd wanted to use with the A7 because both cameras use the E-mount system. And so there's a few things to note here. There's two ways to make NEX lenses work, and we're going to look at both of them. There's some trade-offs and there's some advantages to both, and we're going to cover all that. So let's get started. On the A7, let's start with the 16mm f2.8 Pancake lens, which I'm a big fan of. At least I was on my NEX7. Gives you a pretty wide angle view, especially on a full frame sensor, and it's a fast aperture, so it does mount right up. Let's go ahead and swivel around, and you'll notice one thing immediately. And let's zoom in here. And that's the enormous vignetting around the edges. Now, because this is a prime lens, we don't have any ability to zoom at all. And so we do get this vignetting because it's an APS-C lens on a full frame sensor. No good. But there is something that we can do, and this is the trade-off. If we are absolutely adamant about using this lens, if this fits the bill for what we need to shoot, on the A7 and the A7R, we can come in here to the menu, and we'll navigate to the settings menu here, and we'll come down to the 5th page, and this option here, APS-C size capture. Yeah, that's in focus. If we use this, we have 3 options: on, auto, and off. If we set it to off, then this is the effect that we're going to get. It's going to process the image, it's going to view the image exactly as it should, which is to add this vignetting because, again, we're not getting all of the light through the lens. But if we change this to auto, anytime we add an APS-C, in other words a crop lens, to the A7 or A7R, then the camera will adjust for that vignetting and give us the full image. It won't have any vignetting around the edges. However, the trade-off here, and I don't think we can look at the actual image size. Let's go ahead and take a quick shot. The trade-off here is that it's downsizing the image that we see to about 10 megapixels. Let's see if it'll give any indication of the size here. It's not. So I'll add this to the video afterwards, but you can see that it did honor the 16mm. It did shoot, well, I've got it at f4. It'll shoot at f2.8, and we don't have any vignetting. So for all intents and purposes, we can still make use of this lens, this APS-C lens, on a full frame camera if we're willing to go from the 24 megapixel native resolution of the A7 down to 10. So if it's a shot where you don't need all the resolution, maybe it's an online image, something you're going to not worry about printing, this lens is still fully functional, still fully capable. So that being said, let's go ahead and add the Fisheye Converter, which I enjoyed using from time to time, to the front of the 16mm. Let's take this filter off. There we go. So by adding that and still keeping the settings with the APS-C capture to automatic, again, we have a fully functioning f2.8 16mm Pancake with a fisheye. So again, we're going to be downsized to 10 megapixels for this, but it does work. Let's get rid of the display here. There's no vignetting when you use the APS-C capture mode. And this is going to be true for all the lenses that we're going to look at today. because we are getting a full 16 millimeter even on a crop lens. We do get that wide angle, and as of right now, there is no 16 millimeter equivalent, especially at an f2.8 for the A7 full frame lenses or full frame sensors. Sorry. So we're going to pull this one off, set it aside, and the next lens we'll look at is my absolute favorite lens, which is the 10 to 18 millimeter E-mount lens. And I absolutely loved this one on the NEX7. It was my go-to for almost everything because it gave me such a wide angle look. So we'll switch back here, and this is where it gets interesting. If you have this lens, you probably still want to make use of it when you switch over to the A7 because you paid so much for it. This is an $850 lens, and it does have some great capabilities. Let's go and remove this lens hood. And so you'd probably still love to be able to use it. But again, and this is at the widest point, at 10 millimeters, we get this really obnoxious vignetting all around the edges. And that's probably enough so that you probably couldn't even use lens correction in Lightroom, for example, to get rid of that much. But it gets really interesting. Let's brighten up this image just a little bit so you can see that vignetting more pronounced. It gets a little bit more interesting when you start to move through the focal range. So instead of 10 millimeters here, once we move in, and this is about 12 millimeters. Let me move back and make sure you can see that. Yeah. About 12 millimeters, the image starts to become usable. We do have a little bit of vignetting here around the corners, but that's to the level that Lightroom or whatever post-processing software you use could most likely apply some lens correction to get rid of. Or maybe, for that matter, maybe the photo that you're taking, maybe you like that vignetting look, and so this is fine. If so, then 12 millimeters is where it starts on this lens. So we'll move through a little bit further. Here's 14 millimeters, and that vignetting is almost gone. You don't see but just a trace of it here in the far corners, which again still makes the image very usable. And this is at full resolution. This is not using this is not using the camera's downsizing. The APS-C size capture we've turned off. So this is exactly as the sensor's seeing it. We move up to 16 millimeters and there's no vignetting. What you see down here in the right corner is just but a small shadow. And if we boost that ISO up a little bit more, you can really get a good feel for that. Vignetting is completely gone at 16 millimeters. But then, when we get back to 18 on the zoomed part of the lens, we do start to get a little bit of it back. And just here in the extreme corners. Again, probably something you could easily apply some lens correction for and remove. So when looking at this lens as a whole, if you still do want to use the 10 to 18 millimeter on the A7 or A7R, it's really only the widest part of the lens that you're going to lose use of. So 10 millimeters is useless. We can knock that out. But once you get here to 12 millimeters, it starts to become usable. If you want to do some post-processing cropping, or if you want to apply lens correction, or if you don't mind that vignetting look, this is what you're in for. So all the way from 12 to about 17 millimeters, and then here's 18 where you start to get a little bit more pronounced. 12 to 17 is perfectly usable. 18 is usable with just a little bit of vignetting around the edges. It's really only on the wide side, that 10, there's 11, and now we're at 12 where it's usable again. So 10 and 11, leave those, don't expect to get much use out of those, but it's still great to be able to put this $850 lens on a full frame camera and get the native results that you would want. And when we do turn on the APS-C size capture, we'll go ahead and flip this back to on. Again, you're going to be downsizing to a 10 megapixel photo, but the camera is compensating for all of that, or for all that vignetting throughout the entire focal range. So from 10 all the way into 18, perfectly usable. As you can tell, let's flip back and forth here, you can see the cropping that the camera is doing to achieve that down to that 10 megapixel size. So here at 10 millimeters, our door frame is just in from the edge on both sides. But when we turn APS-C capture to off, also at 10 millimeters, you can see the difference there. When we put it at 12, which is what we could say to be usable, it's much further in. So that's what you gain, and that's what you trade off by using that APS-C capture mode on the A7. So this is my favorite lens. I am planning on keeping it and using it with the A7. I plan to just not use that low 10 to 12 millimeter focal range and just do all of my shots from 12 millimeters on up. And then if I need to do any corrections, I can do that in post. So we'll go ahead and pull this one off, and we'll look at the last lens, which is the kit lens that came with my NEX7 originally, an 18 to 55. So if you don't have any kind of zoom lens, if you didn't buy the 28 to 70 that comes with the A7, or if you're saving up for the 24 to 70 lens on either of the two, and you just want to throw this kit glass on there, this is what you're in for. So let me just check and make sure. Yep, you can see that well. This is at the widest end at 18 millimeters, and that vignetting is just about as pronounced as I've ever seen it. Really hard circular edges around where the lens is leaving off light from the sensor. So when you start to zoom in, it doesn't really get any better. That vignetting widens just a little bit, but here we are at 55 millimeters, completely unusable unless you're going to do a center crop where you'd be outside of that range. But there's nothing here that, no part of the range that becomes usable really, like we saw with the 10 to 18, where once you got out of the wide side and once you got out of the zoomed extremes, that middle focal range did become available. Not the case with this kit glass. It's just all the way through the range. And we are at 55. Go back down all the way to 18 right there. Nothing. Again, you can, if you're willing to sacrifice resolution, you can kick this APS-C capture on and the lens becomes usable again at 10 megapixels. So here we are at 18. We'll go all the way into 55. Looks nice. So that would be your only option on using the 18 to 55 kit glass on the A7 or the A7R, would be to use that APS-C, that compensation mode that accounts for that difference. But otherwise, this is the effect you're going to get. So that's it. Those are the three lenses that I had for the NEX7, as well as that fisheye converter for the 16 millimeter. I'll be sadly letting go of that Pancake lens as well as the kit glass, and only keeping the 10 to 18 for use on the A7. Again, I'll just sacrifice that lower end, that wider side focal range from about 10 to 12 millimeters, and I'll keep it at that full native 24 megapixel resolution. So that's it for today. This is the end of the second video. For more on photography as well as my adventures traveling around the world, trying to capture the best pictures that I can, check out backpackingearth.com, and you can also follow me on Twitter. I'm at MBCHP. So until next time, thanks again.